The reservation book at Cielo Nero read like a catalog of New York's most dangerous men. Adrian Moretti's name sat at the top every Thursday night, printed in gold ink that seemed to warn the staff, handle with care. Tonight was no different, except for the tension that electrified the air like a coming storm. Natalia Petrov moved between tables with practiced invisibility, the kind servers perfect when they learn that being noticed means being vulnerable. Her black uniform blended into the restaurant's shadows, her steps silent on marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a year. She'd worked at Cielo Nero for 8 months, always punctual, always polite, never asking questions about the men in expensive suits who spoke in code and left envelopes thick with cash. "Table 12 needs water," Marco hissed at her, the head waiter's face pale with anxiety. "And for God's sake, don't make eye contact." Natalia nodded, filling crystal glasses from a bottle that probably cost her weekly salary. Table 12 was Adrian Moretti's private booth, tucked in the back corner where conversations died before they reached other ears. She'd served him before, always keeping her gaze low, her Russian accent buried under carefully practiced English. Tonight, the booth held 6 men instead of the usual 4. Moretti sat at the center, his silver-streaked hair immaculate, his navy suit tailored to perfection. At 45, he carried authority like other men carried weapons, always loaded, always ready. His dark eyes scanned the room constantly, cataloging threats, calculating odds. The 2 strangers wore different suits, Eastern European cuts that hung slightly wrong on their shoulders. They spoke in low, guttural tones that made Moretti's men shift uncomfortably in their seats. One was broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The other was thin, nervous, fingers drumming against the table in anxious rhythm. Natalia approached with the water, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. The scarred man was speaking, and the sound of his words hit her like a physical blow. Russian. Pure, unaccented Russian from somewhere near Moscow, maybe Tver. "The shipment arrives Tuesday," he said in her native tongue, "but the price has changed. Your Italian friend needs to understand. We are not negotiating anymore." Moretti's lieutenant, a man called Sal with hands like concrete blocks, leaned forward. "What's he saying? Anybody understand this?" The Russians continued, ignoring the question. The thin one pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. "These are the names of everyone who knows about the transaction. If Moretti cannot agree to our terms, we have other buyers. The Colombians are very interested." Natalia's hand trembled as she poured water. She understood every word, every threat, every detail about what sounded like a weapons shipment worth millions, maybe tens of millions, the kind of deal that could shift power across multiple organizations. "Does anybody in this godforsaken organization speak Russian?" Moretti's voice was quiet, but the fury underneath made everyone at the table freeze. "I pay you people to be prepared for everything, and I'm sitting here like a deaf man while these Slavic bastards talk circles around me." Sal spread his hands helplessly. "Boss, we got guys who speak Spanish, Italian, even Mandarin, but Russian, that's..." "Useless," Moretti finished, his jaw tight. "You're all useless." The Russians exchanged glances, smirking. They knew their linguistic advantage had just become a weapon. The scarred one spoke again, his tone mocking. "Tell the Italian we're tired of waiting. Either he agrees to our new price, or we walk. And when we walk, we talk." His enemies would love to know about the Judge Henderson situation. Natalia's breath caught. Judge Henderson. That name had been in the news 3 months ago. A sudden retirement, rumors of blackmail, whispers about organized crime. If these Russians had evidence connecting Moretti to that scandal, it wasn't just money at stake. It was everything. She should walk away, pour the water, disappear back into the kitchen, forget everything she'd heard. That was survival. That was smart. But her hands were already shaking. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Memories of another room, Another language barrier. Another moment when silence had cost everything. She'd been 7 years old, watching men in leather jackets question her father in Russian, while her mother begged in broken English that nobody understood. The memory of her mother's tears, her father's broken body, found 3 days later near the docks in Brighton Beach. 60 seconds, the thin Russian announced in his language, checking his watch. Then we leave, and Moretti can explain to his associates why he let the biggest opportunity of the decade walk away because he couldn't find a translator. Moretti slammed his hand on the table, making glasses jump. "Somebody tell me what the hell is happening, or I swear—" "They said they're leaving." Natalia's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. The words came out in perfect, unaccented Russian. "And they're threatening to expose you regarding Judge Henderson unless you agree to triple their original asking price for the shipment." The silence that followed was absolute. Every head turned toward her. Moretti's dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that should have made her look away. But something had shifted inside her. The invisible waitress was gone. In her place stood Natalia Petrov, daughter of Viktor Petrov, who'd been a translator for the Russian consulate before the wrong people decided he knew too much. "You speak Russian." Moretti's statement was flat, dangerous. "Yes, sir." "How well?" "I was born in St. Petersburg. I spoke Russian before I spoke English." The scarred Russian's smirk had vanished. He leaned forward, studying her with new interest. "Where in Petersburg?" "Vasilyevsky Island," she answered in flawless Russian, meeting his gaze. "Near the 7th line. I lived there until I was 7, before my family had to leave." "Had to leave," the thin one repeated, his fingers finally still on the table. "Interesting choice of words." Moretti raised a hand, silencing everyone. "I don't care about anybody's life story right now. What I care about is what these men are actually proposing, and why they think they can threaten me in my own restaurant." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit. Translate. Everything." Natalia hesitated. Every instinct screamed that sitting at Adrian Moretti's table meant crossing a line she could never uncross. Waitresses were invisible. Translators were witnesses. Witnesses in this world had a short life expectancy. But she was already standing in the spotlight. The only question was whether she'd use it to illuminate or to burn. She sat. The scarred Russian smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So Moretti found himself a little Petersburg girl. "Tell us, little girl, what brought your family to America, running from debts, from enemies?" "Tell me what you're really here to discuss," Natalia replied in Russian, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. "The weapons shipment is obviously real, but that's not why you're demanding 3 times the agreed price. You want something else." The thin one's eyes widened slightly. Around the table, Moretti's men shifted, confused and increasingly nervous. Only Moretti himself remained perfectly still, watching the exchange like a chess master, studying an unexpected move. "Smart girl," the scarred Russian acknowledged. "Translate this for your new employer. We know about the Judge Henderson payments. We know about the Brooklyn warehouse fire last July. We know about the senator's daughter and what really happened in Atlantic City. The shipment? That's just business. But information? Information is insurance." Natalia turned to Moretti, her voice calm as she switched to English. "They're blackmailing you. The weapons deal is legitimate, but they're using it as cover to demand payment for their silence about your operations. They have evidence about Henderson, a warehouse fire in Brooklyn last July, and something involving a senator's daughter in Atlantic City." Moretti's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the table, the only sign of emotion. "Ask them how they obtained this information," she translated. The Russians exchanged glances. "Poetry," the thin one finally said in Russian. "We have it all written in poetry. Pushkin, Lermontov, Brodsky, beautiful verses that tell ugly stories. Your people would never understand, even if they found the documents. But we do. And so, it seems, does your little waitress. Natalia's blood turned cold. She knew exactly what he meant. Soviet-era intelligence operatives had used classical poetry as code. Specific words, line breaks, and references to famous verses could hide entire networks of information. It was elegant, nearly impossible to crack without deep cultural knowledge, and absolutely deadly in the wrong hands. They're using coded poetry, she told Moretti. Russian classical poetry with information hidden in the verses. It's an old KGB technique. For the first time, something flickered in Moretti's eyes. Not fear. Men like him had evolved past simple fear, but recognition of genuine danger. Can you decode it? He asked. If I see it, maybe. It depends on... Show her, Moretti commanded, his gaze never leaving the Russians. The scarred one laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. Why would we do that? Because I'm going to kill you both right here, right now, unless you prove you actually have what you claim. My restaurant, my rules. You bring allegations, bring proof. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sal's hand moved toward his jacket. The thin Russian's fingers twitched toward his pocket. Natalia found herself holding her breath, suddenly aware that she was sitting in the exact center of a powder keg with multiple lit fuses. Peace, the scarred Russian said, raising his hand slowly. We came for business, not war. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside pocket, sliding it across the table to Natalia. Read this. Tell your boss what it says. Natalia unfolded the paper with shaking fingers. The handwriting was precise, elegant, written in Russian cursive that flowed like water. At first glance, it appeared to be verses from Eugene Onegin, Pushkin's masterpiece. But as her eyes tracked the lines, she began to see the pattern. Certain words were emphasized with barely perceptible marks. Specific line breaks occurred in unnatural places. References to minor characters appeared when they shouldn't. It was brilliant and terrifying. The first verse, she said slowly, her mind working through the layers of meaning. References Henderson by using the judge character from Pushkin's The Captain's Daughter, but with modified dates that correspond to real events. The second verse. She paused, her throat dry. The second verse lists bank account numbers disguised as poetic meter. The third describes the warehouse fire using imagery from Lermontov's The Demon, with specific details about the accelerant used and the insurance fraud involved. Moretti leaned back, his face unreadable. This is one page. They mentioned they have more, Natalia confirmed. This is just a sample. Ask them how many pages. She did. The thin Russian smiled. 47 pages. 47 poems. Enough to send Mr. Moretti and half of his organization to prison for life, or to the bottom of the Hudson River if his rivals reached them first. When Natalia translated, she watched Moretti's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She'd just painted a target on her own back. She knew too much now. She'd decoded their secret. She'd made herself valuable, which in this world was just another way of making yourself vulnerable. Name your price, Moretti said quietly. For everything. The shipment and the poetry. The scarred Russian leaned back, spreading his arms in a gesture of false magnanimity. Finally, we speak business. The weapons shipment, 50 crates of merchandise from our Serbian associates, will cost you $12 million instead of the $4 million we originally discussed. The poetry? Another $10 million for the complete collection and our assurance that no copies exist. $22 million, Moretti repeated, his voice dangerously soft. For merchandise I could source elsewhere, and information you claim to have, but haven't fully proven. Source elsewhere? The thin Russian laughed. Your Colombian friends? After what happened to their shipment last month? Or maybe the Albanians? who are currently explaining to federal investigators why their warehouse contained enough firepower to invade a small country. He leaned forward. We're not just selling you guns, Mr. Moretti. We're selling you the only guns available, from the only suppliers left who haven't been compromised. And the poetry? That's just us being entrepreneurial. Natalia translated, her mind racing. She'd stumbled into something far bigger than a simple transaction. This was about power, territory, and survival at the highest levels of organized crime. And she was sitting in the middle of it, her knowledge of Russian classical poetry somehow transformed into a currency worth millions. Ask them why they came to me, Moretti instructed. If this information is so valuable, they could have sold it to my enemies for more. The question, when posed in Russian, made both men smile. The scarred one answered, because selling to your enemies means starting a war. Wars are expensive, unpredictable, and bad for business. We prefer stability. You pay us, we give you the tools to neutralize the threats, and everyone continues making money. Dead men spend nothing. Pragmatic, Moretti acknowledged when Natalia translated, but incomplete. There's something you're not telling me. What's the real reason you're here, in my restaurant, instead of auctioning this to the highest bidder? The Russians exchanged a look. Something unspoken passed between them, and Natalia caught it. A flicker of concern, maybe even fear. Whatever they were running from, it was big enough to make them seek protection from one of New York's most dangerous crime bosses. Tell him, the thin one said in Russian, that the information we have came from someone he knows, someone inside his organization who's been recording everything for months. The poetry isn't just information. It's evidence that could bury him, yes, but also evidence that could expose the traitor. We're offering him a chance to find the snake before it strikes. Natalia's translation fell like a stone into still water. The ripples spread across Moretti's face, subtle but unmistakable. Around the table, his men shifted uncomfortably. Sal's hand moved back toward his jacket. The others straightened, suddenly aware that danger could come from any direction, including from within. A traitor, Moretti said, his voice like ice. In my organization. Multiple traitors, the scarred Russian corrected through Natalia's translation. The poetry mentions names. Not always directly, but the references are there for someone who knows what to look for. Someone who understands both Russian literature and your business. Every eye turned to Natalia again. She felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. She wasn't just a translator anymore. She was the only person in the room who could decode evidence that might mean life or death for everyone present. How many names? Moretti asked. 7. Natalia answered, after receiving the Russian response. Hidden in 7 different poems, using different classical references. They'd need to be cross-referenced with your organizational structure to identify the specific individuals. And you can do this. It wasn't a question. Natalia swallowed hard, aware that her next words would seal her fate one way or another. Yes. If I have access to the full collection and information about your organization's hierarchy, I can identify them. Then here's my counteroffer, Moretti announced, his gaze moving between the Russians and Natalia. I'll pay $8 million for the weapons shipment, fair market value from any honest assessment. For the poetry, I'll pay $5 million. But only after Miss Petrov here has verified its authenticity and identified the traitors. You'll wait in a secure location while she works. When I have names, you get paid. If the information is false or incomplete, you don't leave New York alive. The thin Russian started to protest, but the scarred one held up a hand. Acceptable, with one condition. The girl works under our supervision. We don't hand over the poetry and disappear while you hunt for traitors who might not exist. She decodes with us present. No, Moretti said flatly. You wait in a secure location. She works in my office with my security, under my protection. You get updates every 4 hours. When she's done, you get paid and escorted to the airport. That's the deal. How do we know you won't just take the poetry and kill us? You don't, but I'm Adrian Moretti, and I don't need to steal information when I can afford to buy it. More importantly, if I kill you, your Serbian friends will assume I'm compromised and stop doing business with me entirely. I need those weapons, and I need suppliers I can trust. Killing you would be short-sighted and stupid, and I didn't build this organization by being either. Natalia watched the negotiation unfold with growing horror. She'd gone from invisible waitress to key player in a multi-million-dollar deal involving international arms smuggling, organizational betrayal, and coded Russian poetry. Her hands shook as she translated the final exchange, the reality of her situation crystallizing with each word. The Russians conferred quietly in their native language. They didn't know she could still hear them, their voices low, but not quite low enough. He's right, the thin one muttered. We need him more than he needs us. The Serbians won't work with anyone else in New York, and we can't move the merchandise through Boston or Philadelphia. This is our only play. And the girl? The scarred one asked. She's smart. Too smart, maybe. She knows more than she's saying. Doesn't matter. Once Moretti has the poetry and identifies his traitors, she's a liability. He'll handle it. Natalia kept her face carefully neutral, translating unrelated conversation while her mind screamed warnings. She'd just heard her own death sentence, delivered casually as an afterthought. The Russians expected Moretti to kill her once she'd served her purpose. And why wouldn't he? She'd seen too much, knew too much, represented too much risk. We have a deal, the scarred Russian announced in English, his accent thick but understandable. The girl translates, we wait, we get paid. Everyone wins. Everyone wins? Moretti echoed, standing. The meeting was over. He gestured to Sal and another man. Take our guests to the Riverside property. Make them comfortable but secure. 4-hour updates, like I promised. Miss Petrov, you're coming with me. The Russians departed with Moretti's men, their departure drawing curious glances from other diners. Natalia remained seated, her legs suddenly uncertain beneath her. She'd just agreed to decode documents that could identify traitors in a major crime organization, working for a mob boss who would probably kill her when she finished. Stand up, Moretti commanded softly. Look like this is normal. The other staff are watching, and I don't need them wondering why my waitress is suddenly sitting at my table looking like she's seen a ghost. Natalia rose on shaking legs. Moretti moved beside her, his hand lightly touching her elbow, a gesture that would look courteous to observers, but felt like an iron shackle. He guided her toward the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen, through a door marked private, and into an office that reeked of leather, cigar smoke, and quiet menace. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Moretti moved to his desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He held one out to her. Drink. You look like you need it. I don't. It's not a request. Natalia took the glass, the whiskey burning her throat but steadying her nerves. Moretti settled into his chair, studying her with the same intensity he'd directed at the Russians. So, Natalia Petrov from Vasilyevsky Island, he began. Why is a woman who speaks fluent Russian and can decode Soviet-era intelligence techniques working as a waitress in my restaurant? I needed a job. I didn't lie on my application. You didn't mention you're basically a walking codebreaker either. He sipped his whiskey. Your father, Viktor Petrov, what did he really do before you came to America? Natalia's chest tightened. Nobody knew about her father. She'd spent years burying that history, creating distance between the scared 7-year-old refugee and the careful, invisible adult she'd become. He was a translator at the Russian consulate, that's all. No, Moretti said quietly. That's not all. Translators don't teach their children KGB poetry codes. Translators don't end up dead in Brighton Beach with their families running for their lives. So try again, and this time, don't lie to the man who's about to trust you with information that could destroy him. The room spun slightly. Natalia set down her glass before she dropped it. My father was recruited by the FSB, the successor to the KGB, to manage communications between Russian organized crime and their American contacts. He translated for them, but he also decoded messages, identified patterns, reported back to Moscow. When he tried to stop, when he said he wanted to protect his family, they made an example of him. And your mother? Died 3 years later, cancer officially. But she was never the same after what happened to my father. I think she just gave up. Moretti nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. So you grew up understanding that information is dangerous, that being valuable to the wrong people is a death sentence, and that the smartest way to survive is to be invisible. Yes. Which makes tonight completely out of character. You revealed yourself, your skills, your knowledge. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Why had she spoken up? Why had she chosen visibility over safety, involvement over escape? Natalia searched for an answer that made sense, but the truth was complicated and raw. Because I was 7 years old when my father died, and nobody could translate what was happening. The police didn't understand Russian. The doctors didn't speak English well enough to explain why my mother kept crying. And I was just a child trying to make sense of adults speaking different languages past each other. She met Moretti's gaze directly. I spent my whole life watching people fail to communicate, watching misunderstandings turn into violence. Tonight, I could prevent that. So I did. Noble, Moretti observed. Also stupid. Those Russians you helped? They fully expect me to kill you when this is over. They said so, in Russian, thinking you'd translated everything and weren't still listening. I know. I heard them. And you still agreed to decode the poetry. I didn't see where I had a choice. There's always a choice. Moretti stood, moving to the window overlooking the restaurant below. You could have stayed quiet. Let us flounder. Let the deal fall apart. Instead, you made yourself indispensable, which means you're now in the exact position you spent your whole life trying to avoid. So what happens now? Natalia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. I decode your poetry, identify your traitors, and then you tie up loose ends? Moretti turned, his expression unreadable. That depends entirely on what you find and how useful you prove to be. The Russians think you're disposable. They're wrong. Someone who can decode Soviet poetry, speak multiple languages, and keep calm in the middle of a criminal negotiation? That's not disposable. That's rare. You're saying I work for you now. I'm saying we'll see. First, prove you can do what you claim. Then we'll discuss your future, assuming you have one. The office Moretti provided wasn't what Natalia expected. Instead of the dark, claustrophobic room she'd imagined, he led her to a converted library on the 3rd floor of the building, adjacent to Cielo Nero. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes in multiple languages. A heavy wooden desk sat before a tall window overlooking the Manhattan skyline, and a laptop waited on its polished surface. The poetry is being delivered electronically, Moretti explained, entering a password that brought the screen to life. Our Russian friends were smart enough not to carry physical copies through airport security. Everything is stored in encrypted files, which my IT person has already accessed and downloaded. The original files will be deleted from their source in 6 hours, so they have motivation to ensure you succeed. Natalia approached the desk cautiously, as if the laptop might bite. The screen displayed a folder containing 47 document files, each titled with a different Russian classical work. You have someone who can break Russian encryption? I have someone who can break any encryption given enough time and money. Don't worry about how it was done. Focus on what needs to happen next. Moretti gestured to a small table near the desk where food and coffee had been arranged. "You'll work through the night. I'll be downstairs handling other business, but there are 2 guards outside the door for your protection." "My protection or my imprisonment? Both." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Everything you discover, every name you decode, you report directly to me. Nobody else. Not my lieutenants, not the guards, not even in your own notes unless they're on that laptop, which is completely isolated from any network. The information you're about to access could start a war inside my organization. Discretion isn't optional. It's survival." "Understood." "I doubt that," Moretti replied, his tone almost gentle. "But you will." The door closed behind him, followed by the click of a lock. Natalia was alone with 47 poems and the secrets they contained. She poured coffee with shaking hands, the rich aroma steadying her nerves, and opened the first file. The document contained verses from Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, specifically the sections dealing with betrayal and social obligation. The formatting was precise, the Russian text rendered in elegant typeface that mimicked handwriting. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple transcription. But as Natalia began reading closely, the patterns emerged. Classical Soviet-era code techniques relied on several methods: specific word substitution, emphasized syllables indicating numerical values, references to minor characters representing real people, and structural anomalies like unexpected line breaks or stanza arrangements. The poetry before her employed all of these techniques simultaneously, creating layers of meaning that required both linguistic expertise and cultural knowledge to unravel. The first poem yielded a date, July 15th of the previous year, and a location, Warehouse District, Brooklyn. Cross-referencing with the sample the Russians had shown earlier, this corresponded to the fire Moretti had been accused of orchestrating. But the coded text contained additional information: insurance policy numbers, payoff amounts, and a name embedded in a reference to Onegin's friend Lenski. Lenski, the poet in Pushkin's masterpiece. Someone artistic, someone whose role was documentation and observation. In Moretti's organization, that would be. Natalia opened a notepad file on the laptop and began typing her analysis. She worked methodically, moving through the first 5 poems in 2 hours. The pattern became clearer with each decoded verse. Whoever had created this record possessed intimate knowledge of Moretti's operations, combined with sophisticated understanding of Russian literary codes. This wasn't just information gathering. It was an art form designed to be beautiful even as it betrayed. By 3 a.m, she'd decoded 15 poems and identified 3 names. The references were subtle but unmistakable once you understood the literary allusions. A mention of Lermontov's Pechorin character, a cynical manipulator, corresponded with financial records and a man whose role in Moretti's organization involved money laundering. A reference to Gogol's Dead Souls pointed to someone managing false identities and paperwork. Each name appeared multiple times across different poems, the repetition confirming they weren't coincidences. Natalia stood to stretch, her back aching from hours of focused concentration. She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights that never quite went dark. Somewhere out there, the 3 men whose names she'd decoded were going about their lives, unaware that their betrayal had been documented in verses they couldn't read, couldn't understand, and definitely couldn't fight. A knock at the door made her jump. The lock clicked, and Moretti entered, his suit jacket removed, his tie loosened. He looked tired but alert, his eyes immediately going to the laptop screen. "Progress?" he asked. 3 names so far from the first 15 poems. The coding is consistent and sophisticated. Whoever created this knew your organization intimately and had formal training in Soviet intelligence techniques. This isn't amateur work. "Show me." Natalia pulled up her analysis notes, explaining each literary reference and how it corresponded to specific operations and individuals. Moretti listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing as she detailed evidence of betrayal from men he trusted. "These 3, he said finally. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without external verification. The references appear multiple times, the details are specific, and the pattern is consistent. If these poems are authentic, and based on the information you already confirmed, they appear to be, then yes, I'm certain." Moretti pulled out his phone, typing a message. "Continue working. I'll handle this." "What are you going to do?" He looked at her, and for a moment, she saw past the calculated crime boss to something colder, more primal. "What I always do when someone betrays me. Make an example that ensures nobody else is tempted to follow their path. You're going to kill them." "No," Moretti corrected. "I'm going to verify your information first. If you're right, then yes, they'll die. If you're wrong, you'll die. Accuracy matters in this business, Miss Petrov. I suggest you double-check your work before I act on it." He left before she could respond. Natalia returned to the laptop with renewed urgency, re-examining every reference, every allusion, every coded detail. She found no errors. The 3 names were solid, supported by multiple independent references across different poems. Whoever had documented Moretti's operations had been meticulous, creating redundancy that made the information verifiable. She continued working, driven by fear and fascination in equal measure. The next 10 poems yielded 2 more names and revealed something even more disturbing. A timeline. The betrayals weren't random or opportunistic. They were coordinated, following a specific sequence designed to weaken Moretti's organization systematically. Someone was orchestrating this, using multiple traitors as pieces in a larger strategy. The 26th poem stopped her cold. It was verses from Brodsky's Letters to a Roman Friend, a meditation on power, exile, and the inevitable fall of empires. But hidden within the elegant lines was a reference that made her blood freeze. The daughter who speaks both tongues, neither trusted nor trusting. A daughter who speaks both tongues, Russian and English. Someone bilingual, someone positioned to translate, someone who could operate in both worlds. Someone exactly like Natalia herself. She read the passage 3 times, hoping she'd misunderstood. But the meaning was clear. The person who'd created these poems knew about her. Known she existed. Known she worked at Cielo Nero. Known she possessed the exact skills needed to decode the information. This wasn't coincidence. She'd been part of the plan from the beginning. The door opened again. Moretti entered with 3 other men, all carrying themselves with the casual violence of people who'd killed before and would again. He approached the desk, his expression grave. "Your 3 names checked out," he said quietly. "We found evidence exactly where your poetry suggested. Financial records, communications, dead drops. You were right about everything." "I need to show you something," Natalia interrupted, pulling up the 26th poem. Her hands shook as she highlighted the relevant section. "This passage, it references someone like me. Someone bilingual, positioned to translate. The person who created these poems knew I was here, knew I could decode them. This whole situation, the Russians coming tonight, me being forced to reveal myself, everything. It was orchestrated." Moretti leaned over the desk, reading the screen carefully. His jaw tightened. "Who knew you spoke Russian before tonight?" "Nobody at the restaurant. I never put it on my application. I deliberately kept it hidden." "Then someone outside the restaurant knew. Someone who tracked you, identified your skills, and engineered this entire situation." He straightened, his mind visibly working through implications. The Russians didn't stumble onto this poetry. They were given it, probably by whoever created it. They came to me specifically because they knew I'd need a translator, and they knew you'd be here to provide those services. But why? What's the end game? "You're the end game," one of the other men said, speaking for the first time. He was older than Moretti, silver-haired with eyes like flint. Think about it. You decode the poetry, identify traitors, prove your value. Moretti keeps you alive because you're useful, but now he has to trust you completely because you know everything. Meanwhile, the person who created this poetry has embedded a spy right in his inner circle, and there's nothing he can do about it because killing you means losing the only person who can decode the remaining poems. That's insane, Natalia protested. I'm not a spy. I didn't even know this was happening until tonight. Doesn't matter, Moretti said, his voice tired. Innocent or not, you're now positioned exactly where someone wanted you. The question is whether I can trust that you're actually innocent, or whether everything you've told me tonight is part of an incredibly sophisticated play. The room fell silent. Natalia felt the weight of suspicion pressing down from all sides. She'd gone from invisible waitress to suspected double agent in less than 12 hours, and the worst part was that she couldn't prove her innocence. Everything that had happened fit the pattern of elaborate manipulation. Even her genuine surprise could be an act. There's only one way to resolve this, she said finally. Let me finish decoding all 47 poems. If I'm a spy, the remaining texts will reveal my purpose or my handlers. If I'm innocent, they'll show who really created this trap and what they wanted to accomplish. Or, Moretti countered, the remaining poems will give you more information about my organization, making you an even more valuable asset to whoever sent you. So, what's your alternative? Kill me now and lose the chance to decode the rest? Keep me prisoner forever? Trust is a choice, Mr. Moretti. Either you make it or you don't, but you can't stay suspended between the two forever. And based on what these poems are revealing, you don't have time to waste doubting me. There are 4 more traitors in your organization, and they're following a coordinated timeline. Every hour you wait is an hour they have to prepare. Moretti studied her face for a long moment, his dark eyes searching for deception, for weakness, for any sign that would make his decision easier. Finally, he turned to the 3 men behind him. Out, all of you. I need to think. They left without argument, the door closing behind them with that same soft click that had become the soundtrack to Natalia's new reality. Moretti moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders tense beneath his tailored shirt. My father taught me that trust is currency, he said quietly. You spend it carefully, you invest it wisely, and you never, ever extend credit to someone who hasn't earned it. In 30 years, I've built an organization on that principle. Tonight, you're asking me to bankrupt that account on a gamble. I'm asking you to recognize that we're both trapped in the same cage, Natalia replied. Someone designed this situation to put us at odds. They knew you'd suspect me, knew I'd have no way to prove my innocence, knew that doubt would paralyze you at exactly the moment you need to act decisively. Don't give them what they want. And what do they want? Chaos. Uncertainty. You, distracted and vulnerable, while your real enemies move against you. The poetry isn't just documentation, it's a weapon. And right now, it's pointed at both of us. Moretti turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, Natalia saw something other than calculated control in his expression. He looked human, tired, almost lost. Finish the poems, he said. But understand this. I'm assigning someone to watch you every second. Not guards outside the door. Someone in here with you, reading every word, watching every move. If there's any indication that you're communicating with anyone outside this room, if there's any suggestion that you're anything other than what you claim, I will kill you myself. Not my men. Me. Do you understand? Yes. Then get back to work. We're running out of time. The person Moretti assigned to watch her was a woman named Elena, somewhere in her 40s with sharp features and sharper eyes. She settled into an armchair near the desk without introduction, a laptop of her own balanced on her knees. Natalia didn't ask what Elena was doing. The answer was obvious. monitoring, recording, analyzing every keystroke, every expression, every breath. Natalia returned to the poems with renewed focus. The 27th through 30th documents revealed the fourth traitor, someone in logistics who'd been rerouting shipments and skimming profits. The evidence was damning and precise, hidden in verses from Akhmatova's Requiem, a poem about suffering and betrayal written during Stalin's purges. The irony wasn't lost on Natalia. Betrayal wrapped in poetry about betrayal, layers upon layers of meaning that turned literature into ammunition. By dawn, she'd decoded 35 poems and identified 6 traitors total. But the remaining 12 documents troubled her. The pattern was changing. The earlier poems had been straightforward: names, dates, evidence. But poems 36 through 47 employed different techniques, more abstract references, deeper codes. Whoever had created them had shifted from documentation to something else entirely. "Coffee?" Elena asked, speaking for the first time in hours. Her voice was surprisingly warm, at odds with her surveillance role. "Please," Natalia answered, grateful for the break. Her eyes ached from screen glare, her head throbbed from concentration, and her entire body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. Elena poured from the carafe that had been refreshed throughout the night, adding cream without asking, somehow knowing how Natalia preferred it. "You're good at this," she observed. "The decoding. Adrian's had analysts before, but nobody who could work through Soviet codes like you're doing." "My father was a good teacher." "Was," Elena repeated, catching the past tense. "He's gone?" "A long time ago. Mine too. Died in a prison in Chechnya when I was 12. Wrong place, wrong politics, wrong everything." Elena sipped her own coffee, her gaze steady on Natalia. "We're not so different, you and I. Children of lost fathers, trying to survive in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. You work for Moretti. I work for survival. Adrian pays well, protects his people, and doesn't ask questions about where we came from or what we're running from. That's rare in this business. Most bosses want to own your past so they can control your future. Adrian just wants loyalty and competence. And you think I can provide both? I think you don't have a choice. Neither of us do. So the question isn't whether you're loyal. It's whether you're smart enough to recognize that survival means embracing the situation rather than fighting it." Natalia took a long drink of coffee, letting the caffeine and Elena's words work through her system. There was truth in what the woman said. Fighting against her circumstances wouldn't change them. The only path forward was through the remaining poems, through Moretti's suspicions, through whatever trap had been laid. "The last 12 poems are different," Natalia said, pulling up document 36. "The coding has changed. See here? Instead of straightforward substitution and literary reference, there's mathematical sequencing embedded in the meter. Specific syllable counts that don't match the original works. It's more sophisticated, harder to crack." Elena moved to stand behind her, studying the screen. "What does that tell you?" "That whoever created these poems wanted to slow me down at this point. The first 35 were meant to be decoded relatively quickly. Identify the obvious traitors, create urgency, force Moretti to act. But these last 12? They're designed to take time. Which means something is happening on a specific timeline," Elena finished. "And whoever set this in motion needs you occupied while it unfolds." The realization hit them simultaneously. Natalia spun in her chair, meeting Elena's alarmed gaze. "How long have I been in this room?" 11 hours. "And during that time, Moretti has been acting on the information I've provided, moving against the traitors I identified, restructuring his security, essentially reorganizing his entire operation based on intelligence that could be deliberately designed to weaken him." "Mother of God," Elena breathed. She grabbed her phone, typing rapidly. "If the first 6 names were sacrificial pieces People someone was willing to burn to establish your credibility. Then the real attack is coming now, while Moretti's organization is in chaos from internal purges, while his attention is focused on identifying remaining traitors, while he's distracted by... The explosion shook the building's foundation. Books tumbled from shelves, the window cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and both women were thrown to the floor as the lights died. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in red. "Stay down," Elena shouted, pulling a gun from beneath her jacket. She moved to the door, yanked it open, and fired 3 shots into the hallway. Natalia heard screaming, running footsteps, more gunfire from somewhere below. "What's happening?" "What you just predicted. Someone's attacking while we're vulnerable." Elena grabbed Natalia's arm, hauling her to her feet. "We need to move. Now." "The laptop, the poems. Leave them. Your life is worth more than data Adrian can retrieve later." But Natalia jerked free, running back to the desk. She yanked a USB drive from the laptop, copying the files with shaking fingers. If she died tonight, at least the evidence would survive. At least Moretti would know who'd betrayed him, even if he couldn't trust her explanation. Another explosion, closer this time. The window shattered completely, spraying glass across the floor. Through the opening, Natalia glimpsed fire blooming from the restaurant below, smoke billowing into the night sky. "Now!" Elena screamed. And this time Natalia didn't argue. She clutched the USB drive and ran. The hallway was chaos. The 2 guards who'd been stationed outside lay motionless in spreading pools of blood. Elena stepped over them without pause, her gun sweeping corners, her body moving with the efficiency of military training. They took the stairs at a run, emergency lighting casting everything in nightmare shades of red. "Who's attacking?" Natalia gasped, her lungs burning. "If I had to guess, the same people who created your poetry. They set this up perfectly. Feed Adrian intelligence about internal traitors. Let him tear apart his own organization hunting them, then strike while everyone's confused and suspicious. Classic military strategy. Make your enemy defeat themselves before you throw the first punch." 3rd floor, 2nd floor. The sounds of fighting grew louder. Gunfire, shouting in multiple languages, the crash of furniture being overturned. Elena paused at the landing, gesturing for silence. Below, in the restaurant's main dining room, figures moved through the smoke and shadows. "Russian accents," Elena whispered. "Not the 2 from earlier. These are professionals. Military contractors, probably. The kind you hire when you want a job done clean and permanent." "How many?" "Too many. We need another exit." They reversed course, taking a service corridor that led toward the kitchens. But as they rounded a corner, a figure materialized from the smoke, the scarred Russian from earlier, his suit torn and bloodied, a gun in his hand. "The translator," he said in Russian, his smile terrible. "How convenient. Save me the trouble of finding you." "You were part of this from the beginning," Natalia replied in the same language, her mind working frantically. "The poetry, the deal, everything. You brought information designed to destabilize Moretti's organization so someone else could attack while he was vulnerable." "Very smart. Too smart, perhaps. We didn't expect you to decode things so quickly, or to realize the trap before it fully closed. But no matter. You've served your purpose." He raised the gun, and time seemed to slow. Natalia saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw Elena moving too slowly to intercept, saw her own death approaching with mathematical certainty. The shot that rang out came from behind them. The scarred Russian jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his chest. He looked down at the wound with something like surprise, then collapsed. Adrian Moretti stepped through the smoke, his own gun still raised, his suit covered in soot and blood. He looked like something from a classical painting of hell, a dark angel walking through flames, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "Nobody kills my translator," he said quietly. I haven't finished using her yet. Moretti moved past Natalia and Elena without a glance, checking the fallen Russian's pulse before removing weapons and a phone from the body. His hands were steady, methodical, a man performing familiar tasks while the world burned around him. Only when he'd secured everything did he finally look at Natalia. "You figured it out," he said. It wasn't a question. Too late to prevent this. She gestured at the chaos surrounding them, smoke still billowing from multiple directions, fire alarms shrieking their warnings into the night. But soon enough to save both our lives, which counts for something. He checked his gun's magazine, then looked at Elena. Status? At least 20 hostiles, professional grade. They came through the front and back simultaneously, using the internal confusion from your purge as cover. Most of your security is dead or pinned down. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they secure the building completely. The Riverside property? Compromised. Got word 3 minutes ago. Everyone there is dead, including the thin Russian. So whoever orchestrated this cleaned up their loose ends. Moretti's jaw tightened. Smart, ruthless. Exactly what I would do in their position. Another explosion rocked the building, this one from above. Ceiling tiles rained down, and somewhere in the distance, the groan of stressed metal suggested structural damage. The restaurant that had stood for 30 years as Moretti's fortress was being methodically destroyed. The archives, Moretti said suddenly. Underground, below the wine cellar, reinforced doors, separate ventilation system, emergency tunnel to the parking garage 3 blocks away. If we can reach it, we can get out alive. That's across the entire building, Elena protested, through the main dining room where most of the hostels are concentrated. Then we go fast, and we go hard. Miss Petrov, stay between us. You're carrying information that someone went to extraordinary lengths to create, and equally extraordinary lengths to bury. That makes you valuable. He looked at her directly. It also makes you a target. Don't slow us down, don't try to be heroic, and for God's sake don't get shot. Clear? Clear, Natalia managed, though her voice sounded distant, like someone else was speaking through her body. They moved as a unit, Elena on point, Moretti taking rear guard, Natalia sandwiched between them clutching the USB drive like a talisman. The service corridor led them past the kitchens, now a smoking ruin of overturned equipment and shattered glass, and toward the main restaurant floor. The dining room had been transformed into a war zone. Tables were overturned, expensive artwork riddled with bullet holes, crystal chandeliers hanging at drunken angles. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, both Moretti's men and the attackers, their blood mixing on marble that had once gleamed like polished ice. The air smelled of gunpowder, smoke, and something darker, the copper tang of mass violence. Left side, Elena whispered. 3 hostiles behind the bar. Moretti didn't respond verbally. He simply moved, his gun tracking toward the bar with fluid precision. 3 shots, 3 bodies falling. Elena was already moving toward the next cover point, her own weapon finding targets with the same deadly efficiency. Natalia ran when they ran, stopped when they stopped. Her entire world narrowed to the space between 2 people who killed with the casual expertise of long practice. She'd seen violence before. Her father's death had ended any illusions about the world's gentleness. But never like this. Never so personal, so immediate, so utterly devoid of drama or hesitation. They reached the wine cellar stairs as gunfire erupted from somewhere behind them. Bullets chipped the walls, sprayed plaster dust, forced them to dive through the doorway and slam the reinforced door shut. Heavy bolts slid home, and for a moment, there was blessed silence. "That won't hold long," Moretti said, already moving down the stone stairs into darkness. "They'll breach it with explosives in under 3 minutes. Keep moving." The wine cellar was a cathedral to expensive taste. Climate-controlled chambers lined with bottles worth more than most cars, organized with the precision of a museum collection. Moretti led them through the labyrinth without hesitation, past vintages from before Natalia was born, around corners that all looked identical in the emergency lighting. "How long until they realize we're not still in the building?" Natalia asked. "They already know," Elena answered. "Professional assault teams don't leave escape routes unmonitored. Whatever's waiting at the other end of your tunnel, Adrian, it won't be friendly." "I know, but it's better than waiting here to die." The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall of wine racks. Moretti pressed a concealed switch, and an entire section swung outward, revealing a passage that looked like something from a Cold War spy novel. Concrete walls, bare bulbs, the smell of damp earth and old secrets. "This was built during Prohibition," Moretti explained as they entered, Elena sealing the entrance behind them. "Modified in the 50s when my grandfather ran this place. It saved my family more than once. With luck, it'll do so again." They moved quickly through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Natalia's mind raced, processing everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. She'd gone from invisible waitress to decoder to fugitive to survivor, each transformation marking a point of no return. Whatever happened next, whoever she'd been before tonight, was gone forever. "The poems," she said suddenly. "The last 12 that I didn't finish decoding. They're the key, aren't they? Not to identifying traitors, but to understanding who really orchestrated this attack." "Obviously," Moretti replied without slowing. "But right now, staying alive takes priority over understanding who's trying to kill us. We'll worry about the poetry when we're somewhere safe." "There might not be anywhere safe if we don't understand the endgame. Think about it. Someone created an elaborate trap using Russian classical literature as code. That level of sophistication, that depth of cultural knowledge combined with intelligence tradecraft. It's not common. In fact, I can only think of one organization that routinely operates that way." "The FSB," Elena breathed. "Russian Foreign Intelligence. More specifically, whoever my father worked for before he tried to leave." Natalia felt pieces clicking together, a picture emerging that was both clearer and more terrifying than anything she'd imagined. "My father didn't just translate for Russian organized crime. He managed communications between the FSB and their American assets. When he died, they lost a critical piece of infrastructure. What if this entire situation, the poetry, the attack on Moretti's organization, everything, isn't about money or territory? What if it's about recruitment?" "You," Moretti said flatly. "They want you. They want someone who can do what my father did. Someone bilingual, someone with his training, someone positioned to operate in American criminal circles. They created a situation that would force me to reveal my skills, then engineered events that would make me dependent on you for protection. Now we're both compromised, both desperate, both perfect candidates for coercion." "That's insane," Elena protested. "The FSB doesn't orchestrate elaborate criminal attacks just to recruit one translator. They do if that translator represents a generational asset. My father's network took decades to build. Recreating it would take another decade, or they could invest a few $1,000,000 in 6 months of planning to position his daughter in the exact same role. From their perspective, it's efficient." The tunnel ended at a heavy steel door with a modern electronic lock. Moretti entered a code, and the mechanism clicked open, revealing a parking garage bathed in fluorescent light. 3 black SUVs waited, engines already running, courtesy of some prearranged signal Natalia hadn't noticed him send. "We'll discuss international conspiracy theories once we're mobile," Moretti decided, moving toward the nearest vehicle. "Right now." The gunfire came from 3 directions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit the garage like strobe lights, bullets sparking off concrete and metal. One of the SUVs exploded in a fireball that threw all of them to the ground, heat washing over Natalia's back like the breath of hell. Elena was up first, returning fire. her face a mask of controlled fury. Moretti rolled behind the second SUV, his gun tracking targets Natalia couldn't see through the smoke and chaos. She lay pressed against cold concrete, clutching the USB drive, feeling utterly useless and simultaneously grateful for her own uselessness. At least she wasn't expected to join the killing. 30 seconds, Moretti shouted. Get to the third vehicle. But before they could move, a new voice cut through the chaos. It spoke in Russian, amplified by some kind of megaphone, the words echoing off concrete walls with brutal clarity. Natalia Petrovna Petrov, daughter of Viktor Mikhailovich Petrov. We're not here to kill you. We're here to bring you home. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Natalia heard her own heartbeat, loud and frantic in her ears. She looked at Moretti, saw the calculation in his eyes, the awareness that whatever happened next would define everything that followed. Home, she called back in Russian, her voice stronger than she felt. I've been in America since I was 7. This is home. America killed your father. America left your mother to die alone and forgotten. America turned you into a waitress, invisible and powerless. We're offering you the chance to become what your father was. Important, respected, essential. My father tried to leave your organization. You murdered him for it. Your father failed to understand that some knowledge makes freedom impossible. He thought he could walk away from his obligations. We corrected his misunderstanding. You're smarter than he was. You understand that power requires sacrifice, that security demands loyalty, that survival means choosing the right allies. A figure emerged from the smoke. He was tall, somewhere in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in harsh climates. His suit was expensive, but not ostentatious, and he carried no visible weapon. Authority radiated from him like heat from pavement. My name is Dmitry Volkov, he continued in Russian, though Natalia suspected he spoke perfect English. I was your father's handler. I tried to save him, but he'd already made choices that left us no alternatives. You don't have to make his mistakes. Come with us peacefully and Mr. Moretti lives. Refuse, and everyone in this garage dies, including you. We'd prefer you alive and cooperative, but we'll settle for the intelligence you've already gathered. The USB drive, Natalia realized. You don't just want me. You want the decoded poems. You want to know what your own operation documented. The poems were created by one of our assets inside Moretti's organization, someone who's been documenting everything for 18 months. But our asset was killed 2 hours ago during Moretti's purge of suspected traitors, and the codes they used to communicate with us died with them. You're the only person left who can decode what they documented. That makes you valuable beyond measure. Moretti, still behind the SUV, spoke without showing himself. She decoded 35 out of 47 poems, identified 6 traitors, including your asset, apparently. If you kill us, you get the USB drive but lose the only person who can decode the rest. Which is why we're offering terms, Volkov acknowledged. Miss Petrov comes with us. The USB drive comes with us. You live, free to rebuild your organization however you choose. In 6 months, after we've extracted everything we need from both her knowledge and the remaining poems, we'll consider releasing her if she's been cooperative. Consider releasing her, Moretti repeated, his tone flat with disbelief. You expect me to hand over my translator on the promise of maybe seeing her alive again? I expect you to recognize when you have no negotiating position. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a parking garage with limited exits. Your organization is in shambles, your resources depleted, your people dead or scattered. We're offering you survival. That's considerably more generous than you deserve, given how much damage you've done to our American operations over the years. Natalia's mind raced through options, finding no good ones. If she refused, everyone died, including herself, which would accomplish nothing. If she agreed, Moretti lived, but she disappeared into an FSB black site, becoming exactly what her father had been, a prisoner of her own expertise, too valuable to release but never truly free. There had to be another option. Some variable she wasn't seeing, some piece of the puzzle that would shift the entire board, and then she saw it, the flaw in Volkov's plan, hidden in his own words. "You said your asset created the poems over 18 months, she called out in Russian. But you didn't know what they documented because the codes died with your asset. That means the poems weren't just documentation for you. They were documentation against you." Volkov's expression flickered. Just for a moment, but it was enough. "Your asset wasn't loyal," Natalia continued, standing slowly, hands visible. "They were building insurance. Evidence against their FSB handlers, evidence of Russian intelligence operations on American soil, coded in a way that only someone with specific linguistic and cultural knowledge could decode. They were planning to defect, and they needed proof of their value to offer American intelligence services. That's why the last 12 poems are more heavily encrypted. They contain the most damaging information, the details about you and your organization." The silence that followed was different than before. Charged. Dangerous. "You're guessing," Volkov said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I'm extrapolating from evidence. The pattern in the poems shifts after number 35. The literary references become more personal, more specific to Cold War-era intelligence operations. The last 12 poems aren't about Moretti's organization. They're about yours. Names, methods, American contacts. Your asset was going to burn you, and you killed them before they could. Now you're trying to recover the evidence and eliminate anyone who might decode it. Which is why you're coming with us." "No," Natalia said firmly. "I'm not. Because if I disappear into FSB custody, Moretti will deliver this USB drive to the FBI, along with everything I've already decoded. Your American operations will be exposed, your networks dismantled, your agents arrested or killed. You'll lose everything you've built here, all to capture one translator who would rather die than become what her father was." Moretti's voice, when he spoke, carried dark amusement. "She makes an excellent point. I'm a criminal, Volkov, but I'm an American criminal. The FBI has been trying to put me in prison for years, but they've never tried to kidnap me from a parking garage. There's a difference between American legal pursuit and Russian intelligence operations, and I know which one I prefer. If she dies, your entire network gets exposed. Those are your terms, not mine." Volkov's expression hardened. He raised one hand, and from the shadows, at least a dozen armed figures emerged, weapons trained on the SUV hiding Moretti and Elena. "Then I suppose we have what the Americans call a Mexican standoff," he said coldly. "Except I have more guns, more people, and considerably more experience in these situations. You can threaten to expose us, Moretti, but you'll be dead before you send a single file. And Miss Petrov, she'll watch you die knowing it was her stubbornness that cost you your life." "Actually," a new voice interjected, speaking English with a crisp American accent, "I think you'll find the situation more complicated than that." Federal agents materialized from impossible places, behind vehicles, from doorways Natalia hadn't noticed, even from the tunnel they'd just exited. At least 30 of them, all in tactical gear, all carrying weapons that made the Russians' arsenal look inadequate. At their center stood a woman in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled back severely, wearing an FBI windbreaker over body armor. Her credentials were already displayed as she approached Volkov with the casual confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Counterintelligence. Dmitry Volkov, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, assault with deadly weapons, and about 17 different violations of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. You have the right to remain silent, which I'd strongly suggest exercising, because everything you've said in the last 10 minutes has been recorded and will absolutely be used against you." Volkov's face went carefully blank. Around him, his people began slowly lowering weapons as red laser sights painted them from multiple directions. The mathematics of survival had shifted decisively. "How long?" he asked quietly. "We've been monitoring Adrian Moretti's restaurant for 6 months," Chen answered, following a FISA warrant based on his suspected criminal activities. Tonight's assault lit up every alarm we have. When we heard Russian being spoken during an apparent assassination attempt, we escalated to counterintelligence protocols. And then Miss Petrov here decoded your entire operation loud enough for our surveillance to capture. We owe her a debt of gratitude." She turned to Natalia, her expression softening slightly. "You're not under arrest, Miss Petrov. In fact, I'd like to discuss employment opportunities. The FBI's linguistic division could use someone with your skill set. But that's a conversation for later, after we process this crime scene and debrief everyone involved." "And Moretti?" Natalia asked. "Mr. Moretti will be detained and questioned extensively. What happens after that depends on what he tells us and how cooperative he chooses to be." Chen's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I imagine a man of his intelligence will recognize when cooperation serves his interests better than obstruction." The FBI's New York field office was nothing like the dramatic portrayals Natalia had seen in movies. It was fluorescent lights, beige walls, endless corridors that all looked identical, and the pervasive smell of industrial coffee mixing with industrial cleaning products. She'd been there for 6 hours, moving between interview rooms while different agents asked the same questions in slightly different ways, probing for inconsistencies, testing the boundaries of her story. Special Agent Chen finally entered the room where Natalia had been waiting for the past 40 minutes. She carried 2 cups of what smelled like actual coffee, not the burnt sludge from the break room, and a tablet computer under her arm. "Sorry for the wait," Chen said, settling into the chair across from Natalia. "Your story checked out. Every detail you provided about the poems, the FSB operation, your father's history. It all aligns with intelligence we've been gathering for years but couldn't quite piece together. You connected dots we didn't even know were on the same page. What happens now? Now we discuss your future. The USB drive you saved contains evidence of the most sophisticated Russian intelligence operation on American soil since the Cold War. The remaining 12 poems you didn't finish decoding? They're a roadmap of FSB activities going back 5 years. Names, locations, methods, American contacts. It's a counterintelligence treasure trove. And you want me to decode them. We want to offer you a job. Full-time analyst position, GS-12 salary scale to start, with promotion to GS-13 after successful completion of probation. You'd work in our counterintelligence division, translating Russian communications, decoding intelligence documents, and providing cultural context for ongoing operations. It's desk work, mostly. Safe, legal, and surprisingly well compensated compared to waiting tables. Natalia sipped the coffee, which was indeed much better than the break room variety, and considered. It was tempting. A legitimate job, a fresh start, a chance to use her skills for something beyond mere survival. But there was a problem. "Moretti," she said. "What happens to him?" Chen's expression became guarded. "That's complicated. Adrian Moretti has been a priority target for federal law enforcement for over a decade. RICO statutes, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering. We have enough evidence to put him away for multiple lifetimes. Tonight's events give us additional ammunition. But he also just saved a federal investigation by protecting you until we could arrive. His restaurant was destroyed in an assault by foreign intelligence operatives, which technically makes him a victim. And according to your statement, he actively opposed the FSB's attempt to kidnap you, despite having every reason to simply hand you over and save himself." Chen drummed her fingers on the table. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is debating whether to charge him, offer immunity in exchange for testimony against the Russians, or pursue some kind of middle ground. What do you think should happen? I think the law isn't always equipped to handle situations this messy. Moretti is a criminal. He's hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on violence and intimidation. But tonight, he also chose to protect an innocent woman from a hostile foreign intelligence service. That counts for something, even if it doesn't erase decades of criminality. So you're going to use him, get his testimony about the FSB operation, then throw him in prison anyway. Chen met her gaze directly. Probably, unless he's smart enough to negotiate a deal that actually serves his interests. A good lawyer, which Moretti can definitely afford, might argue for witness protection, reduced charges, even immunity if the intelligence he provides is valuable enough. The system has flexibility when it wants to. Can I see him? Why would you want to? It was a good question. Natalia examined her own motivations, trying to separate gratitude from Stockholm Syndrome, genuine connection from trauma bonding. Adrian Moretti was a criminal who'd threatened to kill her multiple times. He was also the man who'd stood between her and a Russian kidnapping team, who'd trusted her when every logical calculation suggested he shouldn't, who'd treated her like a valuable human being rather than a disposable asset. Because he deserves to hear the truth directly from me, Natalia finally answered. About what the poems contained, about what I decoded, about what happens next. He risked everything to protect information he didn't fully understand. The least I can do is explain what it all meant. Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. 15 minutes, supervised, and understand that anything you discuss can and will be monitored and potentially used in legal proceedings. I understand. They led her through more identical corridors to an interview room that looked exactly like the one she'd just left. Adrian Moretti sat behind a metal table, still wearing his soot-stained suit, his hands free of restraints, but his posture suggesting he understood the futility of resistance. He looked up when Natalia entered, something complicated flickering across his face. The translator, he said, still alive. I wasn't certain that would remain true once the FBI got involved. They offered me a job. Of course they did. You're exactly what they need. Bilingual, experienced with Russian intelligence techniques, and conveniently available now that your previous employer's restaurant has been reduced to rubble. His tone was dry, but not bitter. Are you taking it? I haven't decided yet. That's partially why I'm here, to understand what you're planning to do. Planning? Moretti laughed, the sound harsh in the small room. My organization is decimated. 6 of my most trusted people were exposed as traitors or Russian assets. My headquarters is destroyed. Federal agents are currently seizing every property, account, and asset I own. I'm not planning anything. I'm negotiating survival, which is considerably less dignified than I'd prefer. The FBI might offer you a deal. Testimony against the FSB operation in exchange for reduced charges or immunity. And then what? Witness protection? A new identity in some Midwestern suburb? Pretending to be a retired accountant while I watch daytime television and slowly lose my mind? He shook his head. That's not survival. That's just a slower death. Natalia pulled out a chair and sat, ignoring the watching agent by the door. The last 12 poems, she said quietly. I decoded them. While we were waiting for processing, I worked through the patterns. You need to know what they contained. Moretti leaned forward, suddenly focused. Tell me. The FSB asset in your organization wasn't just documenting your operations. They were documenting a much larger network. Russian intelligence has been using organized crime families across the eastern seaboard as cover for intelligence gathering, money laundering, and influence operations. Your organization was just one piece. The poems list 7 other crime bosses who've been similarly infiltrated, along with specific details about FSB handlers, communication protocols, and long-term strategic objectives. Christ, Moretti breathed. How long has this been running? At least 8 years, based on the earliest references. Maybe longer. The asset who created the poems was meticulous. They documented everything. Payments, meetings, operations that appeared to be criminal enterprise but were actually intelligence collection. It's comprehensive enough that the FBI could dismantle the entire network if they move quickly, which is why you're valuable to them. You're the key that unlocks the whole operation. Yes, but here's what the FBI doesn't know yet, what I only realized while finishing the decoding. The poems contain a second layer of information hidden beneath the intelligence documentation. Financial records. The FSB has been stealing from the criminal organizations they infiltrated, skimming profits, redirecting funds to offshore accounts. Millions of dollars over nearly a decade. Moretti's eyes sharpened. Account numbers? Routing information? Access codes? Even passwords in some cases. Your asset wasn't just documenting the FSB operation for American intelligence. They were building leverage against their Russian handlers. Come after me, and I'll expose both your intelligence network and your theft. It was insurance, blackmail material designed to guarantee their safety. But they were killed anyway. By your people, during the purge. The FSB didn't know about the poems until after their asset was already dead. That's why they came after me so aggressively. They weren't just trying to recover intelligence, they were trying to recover evidence of their own corruption before other Russian officials learned about it. Moretti leaned back, his mind visibly working through implications. You're saying there's money, substantial money, hidden in accounts that the FSB thinks are secure but actually aren't, because you have the access codes. Approximately $47 million across multiple accounts and shell corporations. Money that was stolen from American criminal organizations, including yours, and diverted to FSB operations. Money that technically belongs to nobody legal, since both the thieves and the original owners are criminals. Money that someone clever could access and redirect before anyone realizes it's vulnerable. Theoretically, Natalia acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral, although doing so would require significant technical expertise, multiple international transactions, and extremely careful timing to avoid detection by either the FBI or Russian intelligence. But possible. Possible. The room fell silent. The watching FBI agent shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain whether she should intervene in a conversation that seemed to be veering toward conspiracy, but hadn't quite crossed that line yet. Why are you telling me this? Moretti finally asked. You could keep this information to yourself. Use it to negotiate your own deal with the FBI, or even access the money yourself. Instead, you're sitting here giving me intelligence that could change my entire negotiating position. Because you saved my life, Natalia said simply. Multiple times. You had every reason to hand me over to the Russians, to abandon me in that parking garage, to prioritize your own survival over mine. You didn't. You chose to protect someone who was essentially a stranger, at tremendous cost to yourself and your organization. That kind of decision deserves to be repaid. Noble. Also potentially stupid, depending on what I do with this information. I don't think you'll do anything stupid. You're a criminal, but you're not reckless. You understand that $47 million could rebuild what you've lost, but only if you're smart about accessing it and smarter about what you do afterward. Moretti studied her face, searching for hidden motives, for deception, for any sign that this was some kind of trap. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because his expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. If I were to access these funds hypothetically, he said carefully, and if I were to use them to negotiate a more favorable arrangement with federal authorities, perhaps by demonstrating cooperation and providing value beyond mere testimony, would you be interested in maintaining our professional relationship? Assuming, of course, that I'm in a position to employ anyone once this situation resolves. Are you offering me a job? I'm suggesting that a person with your skills would be valuable to an organization that's being rebuilt from the ground up. An organization that would need translators, analysts, people who understand international intelligence operations and can navigate complex information landscapes. Legitimate business ventures require those skills just as much as illegitimate ones. More, perhaps, since legitimate business has actual legal consequences for mistakes. Legitimate business, Natalia repeated. You're talking about going straight? I'm talking about evolution. My father ran this organization one way. I ran it another way. Perhaps it's time for a third way, one that doesn't involve federal indictments and parking garage shootouts. The world is changing. Information is becoming more valuable than traditional criminal enterprises. Someone who understands that, who can operate in both legal and extra-legal spaces, who has connections in law enforcement and experience with international intelligence. That person could build something remarkable. And you think I'm that person? I think we could be those people, if we're smart about it. You get a career that's more interesting than decoding FBI surveillance tapes. I get a partner who actually understands the modern world instead of trying to apply 20th century solutions to 21st century problems. The FBI gets cooperation, restitution, and a success story about reformed criminals becoming productive citizens. Everyone wins. Except the FSB. Fuck the FSB. They destroyed your father, killed my people, and tried to turn us both into assets. They deserve to lose everything. The watching FBI agent cleared her throat. I need to report this conversation to Special Agent Chen. The discussion about accessing foreign accounts is entering territory that requires immediate review. Of course, Moretti agreed smoothly. We're simply having a hypothetical discussion about theoretical possibilities. Nothing actionable has been suggested or agreed to. Ms. Petrov is simply explaining intelligence she decoded in her role as a civilian contractor assisting a federal investigation. The agent looked skeptical, but left to make her report. As soon as the door closed, Moretti leaned forward. You have maybe 2 minutes before they come back with lawyers and recording equipment. If you're serious about this, about any of this, I need to know now. Because once I start negotiating with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I need to know what cards I'm actually holding. Natalia took a breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down. She could take the FBI job. Safe, legal, respectable. Desk work analyzing threats from a distance, never risking more than paper cuts and eye strain. It was everything she'd thought she wanted. Stability, security, invisibility. But invisibility had nearly gotten her killed tonight. Invisibility had left her powerless when the FSB came calling. Invisibility was just another word for vulnerability. I'll give you the account information, she said quietly. All of it. But I have conditions. Name them. First, you use a portion of the money to compensate the families of your people who died tonight. Not because you're legally obligated to, but because it's right. Second, whatever organization you build next operates within legal boundaries. I won't help you rebuild a criminal empire. Third, my role remains undefined until I see proof that you're actually serious about legitimate business. I'll consult, analyze, translate, but I won't commit to anything permanent until you've demonstrated this isn't just a con to escape federal prosecution. Reasonable terms? Anything else? Yes. You teach me everything you know about negotiation, strategy, and operating in spaces where the rules are unclear. You saved my life tonight, but you also showed me that powerlessness is a choice. I'm done choosing it. If I'm going to work with you, in whatever capacity that ends up being, I need to learn how to navigate this world as an equal, not an asset. Moretti smiled, and this time it was genuine. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Done. Although I should warn you that navigating this world as an equal means accepting dangers that invisible people never face. Once you choose visibility, you can't go back. Are you certain that's what you want? I was invisible when the FSB tried to kidnap me. I was invisible when your organization was infiltrated. Invisibility didn't protect me. It just meant nobody noticed when I was in danger. Fair point. He extended his hand across the table. Partners, then. Conditionally, temporarily, and subject to neither of us getting arrested or killed in the immediate future. Natalia shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't even a promise. But it was a beginning. The door opened. Special Agent Chen entered with 2 other people, a man in an expensive suit who had to be from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a woman with FBI credentials and a recording device. The negotiation was about to begin in earnest. "Mr. Moretti," Chen said formally, "we need to discuss the conversation you just had with Miss Petrov. Specifically, the references to foreign financial accounts and potential access to stolen funds." "I'm happy to discuss anything that might be relevant to your investigation," Moretti replied, his tone perfectly reasonable. "But I'll need to consult with my attorney first. I'm sure you understand." "Your attorney is in the building. We can bring them in immediately." "Excellent. While we're waiting, perhaps you'd like to hear about my interest in cooperating fully with federal authorities in exchange for consideration regarding pending charges. I believe I have information that would be quite valuable to your counterintelligence division. Information that Miss Petrov's decoding work has made accessible." Chen's expression remained neutral, but Natalia saw the calculation behind her eyes. Moretti was offering a trade: intelligence for leniency, cooperation for survival. The FBI had to decide whether his information was worth the cost of letting a major organized crime figure potentially escape justice. "We're listening," Chen said carefully. "Not until my lawyer arrives. But I will say this. The FSB operation you disrupted tonight is larger than you realize. The 7 other criminal organizations compromised by Russian intelligence? I know most of them personally. I have connections, history, and leverage that could help you dismantle the entire network. But that cooperation requires certain assurances about my future legal status. And the $47 million Miss Petrov mentioned would make an excellent restitution payment to the federal government, demonstrating my commitment to making things right. Assuming, of course, that accessing those funds doesn't expose me to additional criminal liability. These are details my attorney will want to discuss." The lawyer from the U.S. Attorney's Office stepped forward. "Mr. Moretti, I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney James Park. If you're serious about cooperation, we can discuss terms. But understand that any agreement would require full disclosure, complete transparency, and genuine commitment to testifying against foreign intelligence operations. We don't cut deals with people who waste our time." "I wouldn't dream of wasting your time, Mr. Park. Time is the only resource we can't steal, launder, or recover." I learned that lesson tonight, watching my restaurant burn and my organization collapse. I'm 52 years old. I've spent 3 decades building an empire that was destroyed in 6 hours. The next 3 decades? I'd prefer to spend them doing something that doesn't involve federal indictments and Russian assassination teams. "Legitimate business," Park said skeptically. "You're asking us to believe that Adrian Moretti, one of the most successful organized crime figures in New York history, wants to go straight. I'm asking you to believe that intelligent people adapt to changed circumstances. My organization was infiltrated by foreign intelligence. My operations are compromised. My assets are seized. Continuing as I was would be insane. So yes, I want to explore alternative approaches to earning a living, approaches that involve lawyers, accountants, and significantly less gunfire." Park exchanged glances with Chen. Some silent communication passed between them, years of institutional knowledge weighing options, calculating odds. "We'll need to review everything with our supervisors," Chen finally said. "But preliminarily, we're interested in discussing terms. Your attorney can begin negotiations immediately, assuming they're available." "They're in the building," Moretti confirmed, "probably terrorizing your reception desk as we speak." Chen smiled tightly. "I'll have them brought up. Miss Petrov, you're free to go. We have your contact information if we need additional decoding assistance. The employment offer stands if you're interested. Think about it and let us know." Natalia stood, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the night was draining away. leaving behind the bone-deep weariness of surviving something terrible. What about the FSB? Volkov and his people? In federal custody facing multiple charges. They'll be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which in their case includes potential espionage charges carrying life sentences. They won't be bothering you or anyone else. And the other Russian assets in various organizations? That information is classified, but I can tell you that your decoding work has initiated the largest counterintelligence operation against Russian organized crime in decades. You've done your country a significant service, Miss Petrov. The question is whether you want to continue doing so officially or return to private life. Natalia looked at Moretti one last time. He met her gaze steadily, and something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not even an agreement, just an acknowledgement that they'd survived something impossible together, and that whatever happened next would be shaped by that shared experience. I need time to think, she said, about everything. Take all the time you need, Chen replied, but not too long. The world keeps moving, and opportunities don't wait forever. They escorted Natalia out, through corridors and security checkpoints, back into the real world where morning light was beginning to paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and rose. The city looked unchanged. The same buildings, the same streets, the same relentless energy. But Natalia felt fundamentally altered, as if the night had burned away some essential layer of protection and left her exposed to possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Account information when you're ready. Take your time deciding. Either way, thank you for tonight. M. She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Not because she wouldn't take him up on the offer, but because some decisions required space and silence to process fully. The USB drive in her pocket contained enough information to change multiple lives, destroy several organizations, and potentially reshape how criminal enterprises and intelligence operations interacted in America. And somehow, impossibly, she was the person holding that power. Not invisible, not powerless, not running from her father's legacy, but stepping directly into its shadow and making it her own. A cab pulled up. Natalia gave her apartment address, then changed her mind and named a 24-hour cafe she knew in Queens. She needed coffee, real coffee, and time to think about whether she wanted to be an FBI analyst decoding other people's secrets, or something else entirely. Something that didn't have a job description yet, something that would require inventing as she went. The city rushed past the cab windows, millions of people pursuing their own complicated survival strategies. Natalia closed her eyes, let exhaustion wash over her, and allowed herself to smile. Her father had been destroyed by being caught between two worlds. But maybe, with the right allies and the right approach, being caught between worlds wasn't a trap. Maybe it was the most valuable position of all. She'd figure it out, one decoded poem at a time. 3 months later, Natalia stood in an office that still smelled of fresh paint and new furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan from the 30th floor of a building whose previous tenants had included 3 hedge funds, a law firm, and, ironically, a Russian cultural organization that had relocated to Brooklyn under mysterious circumstances. The brass nameplate on the door read, Petrov Consulting, Language Analysis and Strategic Intelligence. It's understated, Elena observed, setting down a box of office supplies. She'd transitioned from Moretti's security detail to something she called Executive Protection and Operational Coordination, which seemed to involve equal parts bodyguard work and business management. Professional doesn't scream we used to dodge bullets in parking garages. That's the idea, Natalia replied, adjusting the placement of a leather chair. The furniture was expensive but not ostentatious, the kind that suggested competence and discretion rather than wealth. Everything about the office was designed to project legitimacy while maintaining flexibility about what that legitimacy actually meant. Her phone buzzed. A message from Adrian Moretti. Signing the final paperwork at 2 p.m. Dinner afterward to celebrate? Natalia smiled. The final paperwork referred to his plea agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, 12 months probation, substantial financial restitution, and a commitment to cooperate fully with ongoing federal investigations into Russian intelligence operations. In exchange, most of the serious charges had been dropped, and he'd been allowed to restructure his remaining legitimate business interests into what his lawyers called private consulting and investment services. It was, Natalia had learned, how powerful people reinvented themselves when reinvention became necessary. The paperwork was different, the rhetoric was different, but the fundamental reality remained. Adrian Moretti would continue operating in spaces where information, connections, and carefully calibrated influence mattered more than traditional business models. And now, so would she. The difference was that everything they did would be legal. Mostly legal. Legal enough that federal prosecutors wouldn't be interested unless they violated extremely specific boundaries that both of them had learned to navigate with uncomfortable precision. "Dinner sounds good," she texted back. "The Italian place near your new office?" "Too predictable. I'm thinking Thai. The place in Chelsea that doesn't ask questions about business conversations." "Perfect." Elena watched the exchange with knowing amusement. "You two have gotten comfortable with each other. We're business partners. Comfortable is important. Is that all you are? Business partners?" Natalia considered the question. Her relationship with Moretti was complicated, built on mutual survival, reinforced by shared secrets, and complicated by the fact that he'd once threatened to kill her, and she'd once decoded evidence that nearly destroyed his life. They met regularly to discuss cases, to coordinate on projects that required both her linguistic expertise and his connections, to strategize about building something that neither of them could have created alone. Was there attraction? Probably. Was there respect? Absolutely. Was there something deeper developing beneath the professional courtesy? Maybe. But relationships built on surviving near-death experiences required time to evolve beyond crisis mode. "Ask me again in 6 months," Natalia finally answered.